Good afternoon. Now, I've not made a video for over a year now, but there's been something coming up lately that I feel quite passionately about, and I think it's the big divide between what we would call the sort of CivNat right, which is sort of mainly Farage type boomers, and the online radical right, and that is the dreaded JQ. Now, I sort of look at this issue and I find myself sort of midway between them. I mean, to start with a nice little quote, I watch I watch all these streams, as I'm sure all of you do. And the other day, I saw Greg Johnson interview a charming Albanian comedian lady who was based, and she said, "If you don't have the truth and your authentic self, you have nothing." And this is what I feel, that when we look at this issue, we must be very careful to stick with facts and truth, because you, on the one hand, you've got the Farage boomers who don't want to ever mention it at all, like it doesn't exist, and then on the other side, you've got people like David Duke who sort of, they want to blame Jews for everything, from the comet that killed the dinosaurs to the JFK thing. And I personally, looking, would think the truth is somewhere in between that. And I think we arrive at that truth by looking at facts. And there's a quote I've given before from Greg Johnson, and he says, "Facts better matter, as facts are our strong point." And and I have the suspicion that some people who are big on this JQ issue, they look over there, they see an anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-traditional activity going on, be it usury, financial fraud, porn, left-wing adverts, uh, you know, Zionist foreign policy, aggressive foreign wars, and they look over there and they see four white liberal traitors, one feminist, one LGBT fanatic, a black person, a Muslim person, and two Jews in the sort of liberal elites who are engaged in this activity or making this decision. And they ignore the other eight, and they look at the two Jews and they go, in proportion to their numbers in the population, there should only be one Jew, and there's two. So they jump up and down. Look! There should only be one Jew there in terms of their numbers. There's two. And and I say, fine. You've got the ability to criticise them, but let's not ignore the other groups doing the same thing. And my take on this would always be, yes, they are a damaging lobby. Yes, they are majority left wing, but without white liberal traitors, I don't think any of this could occur. And I think it's partly a cope that some of us in the movement, we don't want to look at our own people and self-criticise. We'd rather just have some mystical Jew controlling everything. And Dutton, in his Bowden book, he had a good take on this. And he said about how he was writing to someone for the Bowden book to talk to them. And this person was the Duke style fanatical JQ person. And he said, whatever the problem is, it's the Juden. Whereas, and Dutton says in the book on Bowden, whereas the far left virtue signal, the far right purity signal, but with regard to in-group loyalty and out-group hostility. At their extremes, this involves signalling intense disgust for Jews, which they justify with the belief that absolutely everything negative about the West, without exception, is the fault of Jews. In other words, they signal their ethnocentrism to a very pronounced degree, and it is a degree of ethnocentrism that renders them, from their perspective, morally superior to others, and so one suspects helps them deal with neurotic traits such as jealousy or anxiety. For such people, in-group loyalty is often more important than objective truth, just as equality and harm avoidance are far more important than objective truth for woke activists. Now, we would look at woke activists, and because they've got this obsession with harm avoidance and equality, they ignore objective truth. And people within their movement, like me, would say this is one of the big weaknesses they have. And this is why I think ultimately we can defeat them. But if we have people on our side who are doing the same thing, moving away from objective truth because they're so centered on this one issue, we're almost imitating the weakness of the woke warriors. So you've got the JQ obsessives and the woke obsessives. They're sort of united in a sort of weird symmetry. And I always say truth is our strongest weapon. And if we move away from truth, be it to tackle this JQ question or any other question, we're making ourselves weaker. Now, what I say here on this video, I'm not saying it's not necessarily the defined truth. We can't always be 100% sure of what truth is. And I've got some nice little quotes from our friend Friedrich Nietzsche, because Bowden, whose book I've been reading, was a big Nietzsche fan. And he says, the truth can stand on one leg, but give it two and it will get up and walk around. Now what Nietzsche means by that is we can't always be 100% sure what the truth is. And see, Tucker Carlson, he imitated Socrates who said, my only knowledge is knowing nothing. Tucker Carlson said, the more you know, the more you realise you don't know. So I'm not saying my take on this question is 100% true. There may be facts that come out that will disprove something I've said. But again, I will try and stand by the facts as they come out. And whatever my view on the JQ, the LGBT, multiculturalism, whatever my view, I will try and base my conclusions on the evidence and the fact. And I feel if I move away from that because of my personal passions or my personal dislikes, then I've undermined the cause that I'm fighting for. We have to accept conclusions that come that are based on fact and evidence, even when we don't like what this fact and evidence shows us. Now, Dutton also said in the Bowden book, I'll show you the book because I'm addicted to it. I've just started reading it, and it's very good. Like you say, this mystical shaman, Jonathan Bowden. Now, in that book, Dutton, he quotes a survey in 2010 that said they did a survey, and it was based in fact that BNP voters had the lowest average IQ and Liberal Democrats had the highest. I think the BNP average IQ was 98 and the Lib Dem one was 108. the thing is, obviously, as someone who was proud to be a member of the BNP and to deliver leaflets like this, and I've got this leaflet because I don't know if you remember on my last video, I said all I had was a few little cards and I didn't have any of the leaflets that I delivered back in the day. Well, I told this to Mark Collette, and Mark Collette, whatever my disagreements with him on any issue, he was kind and considerate enough to send me a copy of the leaflet, that the award-winning, brilliantly designed leaflet that I think Mark had a big part in designing back from the 2008 London mayoral elections. Now, so like you say, I don't like a survey that says a party that I was a member of was thick, but if it's based on fact and evidence, I will accept it. And and the reason I will accept it is because I feel if we move away from truth and fact and go down a conspiracy rabbit hole, we become a laughing stock. I mean, I don't know if you often hear. I mean, I listen to James O'Brien, the left wing scumbag on LBC, just to hear what the left are thinking and their current trends of thought and debate. And often people who believe in conspiracy theories, they'll be laughed at by smug middle class liberals. Now, I don't say that every conspiracy theory is nonsense. And governments and liberal elites and big business, they lie. I mean, the idea that the COVID pandemic originated in a bat in a wet market rather than the nuclear biological warfare lab next door is patently absurd. And also, the idea that the Southport killer wasn't motivated by Islamic fundamentalism also was absurd, and people in the summer actually went to jail for saying that on social media. So some of this stuff is true, but it's not all true. And we have to be very careful when we're accepting theories and making them part of our ideology. Because if we pick up every conspiracy theory and integrate it into our belief system, we become a laughing stock. And another wonderful quote from Nietzsche: "Not by wrath does one kill, but by laughter." And this is a fact. See, if the movement just becomes a joke and people just laugh at us, it's probably more of a threat than if people are actually threatened by and hating us. I mean, I saw what's his name? The UK Gerard Batten, and he was talking to Dr. Dutton the other day, and he said it doesn't matter if people hate you. If they're feeling threatened by you and noticing you, you can still achieve in politics. And I feel this is part of why the left and the woke thing is crumbling. And I think they're having to slightly dial back on this because it's so obviously nonsense. Now, you know, this fiction that they believe in, that you know, race is just skin colour and there's no difference between human populations. As our societies become more and more multicultural, it becomes more and more obvious that there are deep differences between races and between peoples of the world. And and I mean, the thing is, when it's a tiny percent, it's possible to maintain this fiction. And I think Morgoth said that the sort of high point of this fiction, that race was just skin colour, was the sort of 80s and 90s Hollywood movies. And you watch something like, I don't know, when I was a boy, you'd watch Crocodile Dundee. on Christmas Day or whatever, and you'd see it, and it'd all be all white, but they'd have your token black character, and it normally, I think it was normally tended to be like a chauffeur or a number two to the hero or something like that. And he was quite a nice guy. I mean, the black chauffeur in Crocodile Dundee. This idea that white nationalists, we watch a movie and we see a black person, we're like, oh, there's a black person, I hate them. No, no, nonsense. I watch Crocodile Dundee, I see the black chauffeur, and I think, oh, he's a nice guy. But when I watch a movie today that's been wokeified, and I see a 17th century monarch being played by a black person, or I see black people in London, tons of black people in Victorian London, when yes, there were a few, but hardly any. And and sort of when it's a 95% society, there's more pressure on people to conform. So you will tend to get that the minorities that are there will behave in a more white fashion. They'll tend to conform more. And so when they get numerical courage, groups will revert to type. I mean, I see this here. You've got a load of English people in Puerto del Carmen, so you get English bars there. You've got a load of Irish people in Puerto del Carmen, so you get a St Patrick's Day parade there. I mean, I disagree with that. I think if being Irish is so important to you, you should live in Ireland. I think in Spain there should be Spanish parades. But people like myself who live in Arrecife with more Spanish people, we don't tend to behave in such an English fashion. I mean, I was listening the other day to Tucker Carlson, and he was talking to Chris Cuomo, I think, who's a left-wing CNN or PBS reporter, and he was saying about colour, and he's saying, oh, if you cut a black man and a white man out open, they're exactly the same. It's just skin colour. But you could hear in the way he was saying it, he didn't believe it as much as people really believed it years ago. I remember my boomer Uncle Alan saying to me years ago, all races are the same, and you know that. What, because I've been to university, because I've studied, I should accept that. But really, when we have mass mixing of populations, it becomes obvious that there's differences. I mean, why is Singapore as a city different to Lagos as a city? And it's like because the races of the people there are different. Now, I would not assume that someone from Singapore, if I met an individual from Singapore, was really polite, really well mannered, really really high IQ. I'd judge an individual on an individual, as I wouldn't assume someone from Lagos would be criminal or violent. But I would know if you had 100 people from Singapore and 100 people from Lagos in the Lagos group, the average IQ would be higher. No, in the Singapore group, sorry, the average IQ would be higher. And I would know that in the Lagos group, there would be more people with convictions for violent crime. Now, it doesn't make people from Lagos inferior to people from Singapore. It just makes them different. It just means they're adapted for a different evolutionary environment. And a human being all over the world has adapted to its ecology. And the more we see multicultural societies, the more this becomes patently obvious. And the woke people, by moving away, they make themselves the laughing stock. By ignoring the obvious, as Nietzsche said, not by rage. What was it he said? Not by wrath does one kill, but by laughter. So people are starting to laugh at the woke people, and hence this is why they're rowing back on it, because they know once people are starting to laugh at them, they're getting to the point where even normies aren't believing them. Now, I was listening the other week. I often listen to In Our Time with Melvin Bragg, and what he does, he has three academics, um, and they discuss an issue, certain issues, and it's quite in depth, quite very intellectual discussion. Average IQ person like me, it's quite hard. Often I have to re-listen to parts of In Our Time with Melvin Bragg. When I'm listening to it, I have to keep re-listening to certain parts. Now, from that, I would conclude the academics on that panel are a lot cleverer than me, because I'm having to listen twice to get certain points that they're making. Obviously, no one likes admitting that, oh, so-and-so is cleverer than me, but you have to go on the evidence. Now, the other week on In Our Time, they were talking about the habitability of different planets. And they said, if you took a human being and you raised them in the asteroid belt, and you brought them up there on, say, a space station, that human would, because the gravity there is lower, that human would grow to be about 7 foot tall, and they could not return to Earth because the gravity here on Earth is heavier, so more powerful. So you think if a human in one generation, according to what these scientists estimate, would adapt, to its environment and grow to be 7 foot tall and adapted for weaker gravity, surely humans who've been separated for thousands of years, I think like Africans and Europeans, it's at least 60,000 years, they're going to be different. They're going to adapt to their ecology. And this idea that the human has stood outside of evolution and not adapted to its ecology is patently obviously wrong. And this is why this wokeism is becoming a laughingstock. Now, as Dutton says, of course, no system of categories is perfect. There will always be groups that rest on the borders of any taxonomy. Category systems are useful only insofar as they allow predictions to be made about likely behaviour and outcomes. So we have to be aware these categories are there, but they won't apply 100%. It's like I was listening to Greg Johnson the other week, and he said about, he had a black girl student in his class who was brilliant, who was ever so clever and ever so nice and ever so pleasant, and he said she was totally brilliant and totally able to mix into white society. But then he said, one of her brothers was in trouble with the law and had involved in a shooting and went to prison. And as he says, as we believe in keeping families together, separation is the answer. And this is the thing. You can get a black person who will perfectly fit into white society without any problems, but they will have people in their family who won't, and a lot of them won't, and for everyone that does, there's four more who won't. So let's just be honest and separate. Now, let's look at this JQ issue. Now, the first thing I'd say is another Dutton quote. And as I said about conspiracies, I don't dismiss every conspiracy, but neither do I believe in every single conspiracy. And he points out it's quite easy to keep a small conspiracy secret, but not a big one. Now, I when Mark and Duke are on PWR, I obviously listen to what they say. I like to take a look at opposing arguments. Now, Mark and David Duke, I heard them once say that Jews act like an extended family. Well, fair enough. Well, I read this book, Tacky, Nothing to Declare, when he was sent to prison for having drugs on him at an airport, and he was friends with a black cellmate called Warren, and he got on really well with him. He's a nice guy, but he said when there was a fight and it was a couple of travellers against a black guy, all the other blacks jumped in all of a sudden and helped beat these two travellers up. So you've got Mark and David Duke saying blacks act like an extended Jews act like an extended family. Well, so do blacks. I mean, so do gypsies. I mean, I remember when I was a prison officer in HMP Feltham, I'd talk to the various traveller lads who were in there, and they'd know traveller lads on other wings, and that, there'd be rivalries going on, and there'd be links, and they'd all see each other at weddings, but they'd all know each other, and they'd have quarrels amongst themselves, but at the same time they'd stand firm if one of them was threatened by an outsider. And again, you watch The Sopranos, Italian Americans are like this as well. They act like an extended family. You see in The Sopranos, when they have a wedding or when they have a meeting, they don't have any outsiders there. There's no Irish guys there. There's no, there's no black guy there when they're having one of their private mob meetings. And again, you look, so do the Chinese in Chinatown around the world. I mean, my friend here, Chen, who runs a restaurant, he, not being funny, but he only employs Chinese people, and good luck to him. So that's his right. I believe he should be able to employ with his business who he wants, and it's natural. He would feel that someone from his own culture was better and more skilled at preparing Chinese food. And so when Mark and Duke say that Jews act like an extended family, well, so does everyone else. And it's just a shame that more British people, more white people don't. That's the main thing I'd say on that. I mean, for those of you who haven't watched my previous videos, I used to be a police officer in Westminster, and I lost my job because outside work in my own time, under a false name on Facebook, I criticised police officers joining gay pride parades as narcissistic attention seeking, and said the taxpayer shouldn't fund virtue signalling, and I clicked like on the traditional Britain right-wing group, and it was another white heterosexual Englishman, Paul Blur of Bromley, who screenshotted it and grasped it and sent it to the Department for Professional Standards, the DPS. So it wasn't some black or some gay or some Jew who grasped me and lost me my job. It was a white liberal. And I just say, if Jews, according to Mark and David Duke, are acting like an extended family, I just say, well, that's good. So should we. And just while we're on the subject of Tacky, I actually met Tacky once on, we had a dinner, and it was HMP Belfast in the Thames. And what happened was, I was on the Conservative Democratic Alliance table, and I remember Mike Smith standing up to ask a question and going into a mini speech, and Tacky saying to him, the late great Mike Smith, it looks like you want to give a speech, Mike, rather than ask a question. But the thing is, Tacky, what happened, he'd left his notes for his after dinner speaking at home. Now you and I, if someone was having a dinner to honour us, and we'd left our notes for the after dinner speech at home, during the dinner we'd write some notes so we had something to say at the end. But he didn't. He just stood up and mumbled a few piss lines. And my friend Sam Swirling in the Conservative Democratic Alliance, he said it's like paying to listen to a drunk in the pub. And part of the problem with that is that that's what happens when you have the so-called fuck off money, because you go through your whole life, you don't have to care so much what other people think. So in a situation like that, you've got all those people there. You and I'd be writing a note. Oh, so we've got something to say in the after dinner speech. Well, he's so rich. Why does he care if everyone there thinks he's an idiot drunk? But there you go. That's a little walk down memory lane. Tacky. HMS Belfast. That must have been about 2008, 2009. I mean, Mike Smith died in 2010, so it was before then. But no, it's crazy, isn't it? But he's funny little short guy. He's shorter than me because he was always writing in his Spectator column about judo. Now I imagine him quite a big athletic looking guy. But there you go. Now another thing, Mark and David Duke, when they're on this, they say about Jews being overrepresented in certain areas. Adverts, Hollywood, porn, financial fraud. So they'll talk about Soros, Spielberg, Madoff, Epstein. The thing is, every race will graduate towards jobs that match their innate characteristics. And saying Jews are overrepresented in Hollywood and adverts and finance is like saying blacks from West Africa are overrepresented in football. Blacks from West Africa have got more fast twitch muscle fibres, and so they tend to be naturally better at football. And Hindus are overrepresented in corner shops, and and Chinese are overrepresented in gambling and restaurants. But again, there's not some big conspiracy where Hindus think, oh, I'm going to buy up every corner shop in the town. That just naturally happens. There's not some conspiracy where a load of blacks think, oh, we all sit down somewhere and think, oh, we're going to get on a football team. Again, it just naturally happens. Now, if you look, another thing Mark said the other week, oh, Biden's cabinet, Jews were overrepresented, and he said, oh, that doesn't just happen. But the thing is, if you look at it, when you have a left-wing party in power, certain groups that are naturally majority left-wing will be overrepresented. If you look at Tony Blair's first cabinet in 1997, there were, I think there was around 3 homosexuals. Now I think there's about, I can't remember how many people in the cabinet. I think it's about 12 or 13 or 15. Now, obviously, in terms of their numbers in the population, around 5%, there should only be 1 or at most 2 homosexuals, but there were at least 3 in Tony Blair's first cabinet. But I don't conclude from that somewhere in Soho, in the back of a gay bar, a group of homosexuals that all sat round a table like gay elders of Zion and thought, right, let's all get a load of gays in Tony Blair's first cabinet. No, it just happened because you have left-wing organisations, groups that are majority left-wing, will appear. Now, I'd say to Mark, if you think there was some sort of plot to get so many Jews in the Biden cabinet, just show me the evidence. And this is my problem with a lot of the people who are big on this JQ thing. They'll throw a fact out there, but they'll never back it up. All right, Jews are overrepresented in Biden's cabinet. Well, you show me a process whereby this was plotted for and manipulated. My stance would be, if you get a left-wing party in power, you will get more gays, you will get more Jews, you will get more blacks and Muslims, you will get more feminist women, because these groups will naturally graduate towards left-wing uh, uh, governments and posts. Now, another point that I've heard Mark make to me and other people is that their influence, the Jewish influence and Zionist power, creates this left wing woke culture that we've got, as if every left wing white traitor at some point in their life they had a Jew rubbing his hands together, whispering in their ear, and that may turn them into a woke warrior PC liberal. Now, I mean, first of all, I grew up in the same world they did, uh, uh, and, and I mean, he maybe his case is that it comes from advertising and the propaganda they put in films. Well, I watched all the sofa adverts growing up, where every time someone bought a sofa, it was a white woman and a black man, and it didn't turn me into a left winger who thinks, oh, if a sofa is going to be bought from a shop, it's going to be bought by a white woman and a black man. Now, so what Mark is sort of doing there when he says, oh, all these white traitors, these white liberal traitors, rather than owning it and saying, sadly, a lot of our people have too much empathy and maybe probably developed to help them get through harsh winters and cooperate as a tribe in northern climates. And rather than accepting this, that it's a flaw within white people, that a lot of them end up lefty liberals, more concerned with outgroups than their own. He sort of says, "Oh no, it's all down to some Jew at some point. All these liberals whispering in their shoulder, rubbing his hands together." And now, I mean, let's take an example. We've all seen in schools, in youth clubs across the years, we've all seen instances where there'll be a kid in the class or in the youth group who's got learning difficulties, and or he's a bit thick or whatever, and there'll be another kid who's a bit smarter but quite malicious, and he'll convince the nasty smart kid will convince the thick learning difficulties kid to do something that then gets the poor kid with learning difficulties into trouble. So when Mark says, oh, all these left-wing people, it's all because some Jew whispered in their ear, he's basically reducing the whole white race to the status of that kid with learning difficulty. We've all seen at schools the thick kid doing something because the nasty smart kid whispers in their ear. And when he says, oh, all these white liberals, they do it because the Jew has whispered in their ear, he's reducing the whole white race to a sort of the kid with the learning difficulties. Uh, and and this is the thing. I mean, they haven't been able to do it with blacks who with the averagely lower IQ. I'm not saying all of them, average lower IQ in Africa. They haven't been able to do it with Chinese with the higher social conformity, or Indians with their sort of acquisitiveness and greed. But the race that went to the moon and built empires and made 90% of the scientific discoveries, he's sort of saying, oh, they can do it with us, but not with anyone else. I mean, obviously there is the issue that Jewish people will look white, so they can do, they can fit in easier than they could say in a black society or a Muslim one or a Chinese one. Although there's obviously Sephardic Jews who've lived in Arab countries for hundreds of years. Now, I would say that there is such a thing. I don't say to people like Mark who want to talk about it, I would say, yes, it is an issue we need to talk about. But I would maintain that they don't run everything. I would say they are a powerful lobby who've probably got a disproportionate influence in foreign policy. But I would also argue that in terms of their power, I would say the peak of it was in the 1990s. And this was the sort of boomer Schindler's List world. Now, in that world, I mean, I'm 46. We can all remember the 90s was a very different time, and the World War II narrative of Churchill saving the world was blindly accepted, and all these brave veterans we used to see about, they were accepted as heroes who'd saved the world along with Churchill. And even back then, even people who were used to make the odd racist joke, they wouldn't dare say anything about Jews because they were seen as the victims. Now, and this is the environment into which Schindler's List was released. And it was, these poor Jews, they were the eternal victims. And this is why no one in the 90s would ever dare say anything against them or against Israel. But now things have changed. That, yes, a lot of Jews were in favour of the black and Muslim immigration, but the problem in terms of for their lobby is that a lot of these people they've brought in, these black and Muslim populations, they do not support the state of Israel. If you go to London any weekend and watch these anti-Israel demonstrations, you will see black and Muslim people massively overrepresented. And also there's the fact that when you've got what we've seen in recent months, I mean, I can't even watch it now. You see Gaza on the telly, you see dead babies, you see children with their legs blown off, you see absolute horrors. And against all this, when they sort of stand up and say, "Oh, my Holocaust," and you sort of say, well, the person saying about the Holocaust, A, they weren't even alive in the 1940s, so it never impacted on them, and B, that poor dead brown Palestinian child whose leg's just been blown off, it had nothing to do with him or any of his ancestors. So a lot of the power that they had in the 90s, I see as going. And also, a lot of their children have bred out. I mean, you look at Jews in America. I mean, where is this overrepresentation? It's not Orthodox Jew. It's not Orthodox Jews. They're like Mormons. They will tend to live on the fringes of society, like Mormons, like Amish. It's Ashkenazi secular Jews. And a lot of them in the US and in Britain have bred out. Now, as Dr. Dutton says, most Ashkenazis will be, because they've been in Eastern Europe for thousands of years, they will be around 30% white genetically. So if they then breed out and have a child with a white person, with a Christian, because they're 30% white genetically, the resulting child, you may be looking, 15, 20% Jewish. Now, someone sent in a super chat the other week about this, and what Mark's answer was, oh, the JQ's still an issue because with all this outbreeding, the children are culturally Jewish. Now, for God's sake, I mean, I shouldn't have to tell a veteran nationalist like Mark Collette, and I'd stress this isn't personal criticism. I've got a lot of time for him. He's done a lot for the movement. But I shouldn't have to tell him it's about culture. Race is about genetics. He knows that. I know that. And if we move away from the facts to twist the truth, to make it fit a view that we've got, then we're as bad as the woke people. Now, when he says, oh, a child who is half Jewish, who assuming the Ashkenazi Jew is 30% white anyway, is probably only 15 or 20% Jewish in terms of genetics, is culturally Jewish. How is that any more ridiculous than the sort of Sivnat boomers in Reform who point at their base Muslim pal and they say, oh yeah, his ancestry is totally different, his religion is totally different, he acts totally different, but he's culturally British. Well, no, he's not, because he's not genetically and ancestrally British. Now, I will quote the master for this, and as you say, as I said to you earlier, I will quote the shaman of the radical right, Bowden. Now, he said on this, I'll try and do the voice as well. People are unequal. You remember he used to sort of look about. I'll put the jacket on. I'll put a jacket on. If you remember, I'll also put my reading glasses on. If you remember, Bowden, when he did a speech, he used to sort of look up like that. He used to go, people are unequal. 75% of it is genetic and biological. Partly criminality is biological. Predispositions to drug addictions are biological. Intelligence is biological. Beauty is biological. Ferocity or a predisposition to it is biological. Intellect is biological. You can do a bit, but you're born to be that which you are, and we should celebrate what we were born to be, because we have created 90% of value in modernity. Now there's our based hero, Bowden. And as he says, race is about genetics and ancestry. I mean, Dutton says intelligence is 80% genetic, and social class even across time is 70% genetic. Funny, there was a story in that book that I've just read, and he was staying at a guy's flat in Sheerness, and I don't know whether this was some sort of prurient joke or whatever, but he said to this guy when he was staying in his flat in Sheerness, oh, I had to have my back passage syringed because it got blocked with semen. Well, I'd assume, I mean, I don't think Bowden was gay anyway, so I think this is a sort of prurient joke or another sort of weird lie, because he was always telling these strange lies. Now I would think, unless you'd been buggered by a blue whale or a bull elephant, there wouldn't be enough material up there to cause some sort of blockage. But there you go. It's some very strange lies he told. But again, that's the genius for you. They're not, totally all there, are they? I mean, I think you met Isaac Newton or Mozart, you wouldn't think they were 100% all there, would you? Now, so there we go. Mark says a lot of these Ashkenazis in the US who've bred out will stay loyal to the Jewish race. Well, some of them will, a lot of them won't, because genetically they won't be that much. Now, another point about this, they say about Keir Starmer and his wife and his supposedly Jewish children. Well, again, I've heard a caller on LBC who was an Orthodox Jew, and he rang in and he said to James O'Brien, Keir Starmer's wife is always saying she's Jewish, but it's only her father who's Jewish. We're assuming the father's a typical Ashkenazi with 30% white DNA. Starmer's wife will be 25, 20% Jewish. Starmer's children, we're talking as little as 15 or 10% because they're technically quarter Jewish. So, mate, what, 20% maximum? And if in a society where the whole of London is non-white, and we've got more mosques being built every day, and we're worrying about someone being 10 or 15% Jewish, it's absurd. It really is. And I'd say, you know, people trying to lead us down rabbit holes. All these people on the internet like this worrying about if someone's 15 or 20% Jewish, and then outside in the real world, your town is becoming majority non-white. I'd say rather than sitting on the internet, go out there, deliver some leaflets like this, like I did back in the day, and try and achieve something in the real world. And that's not a snipe at Mark, because Mark has done an awful lot in the real world. But a part of this cultural ethnicity is a lot of left-wingers. They always want to be part of a minority. It's not enough for them to just be in the left-wing woke movement. They want to be a minority. It's fashionable to them. I mean, I always remember we had a teacher at A-level college, Orpington College, Tony Sowerby. And I remember we were discussing race or ethnicity, and me and my base Tory friend Adrian, who had a Jewish dad, but he was right wing. We were sort of coming in with the right wing thing, and then Tony Sowerby suddenly says, because I think his parents were Irish, but he'd lived his whole life in England, raised and born in England. Oh, I'm an ethnic minority. I'm Irish. And this is very much like that woman in the USA who was something like 10% Native American. Who they all used to, Donald Trump was making fun of her, calling her Pocahontas. And part of this, people who are half Jewish or people who are a quarter this or something, if they're left wing, they'll want to be a minority. They won't want to be an evil white heterosexual Christian male. So they'll look for something in their ancestry, so they can be ethnic, as it were. Now, I would say, in terms of minorities, my stance always is, if it breeds with a white woman, how white will the resulting child look, act and feel? Now, I mean, the thing is, a lot of black people, because they will look more black than white, they will identify with their black half. I mean, occasionally you'll get a base one who I'd say, fine, accept them. I think there's a guy here in the Vox Party in Barcelona. But, 9 out of 10 cases, someone half black will identify as black. But with someone half Jewish, who is maybe, 30% or 40% genetically Jewish, it's a lot easier to integrate them. I mean, I'd say to you all, going on about Jews, I'd say watch the Bond film View to a Kill, and the woman in that, the female star in that, was this lady called Tanya Roberts, stunningly beautiful blonde woman. She's dead now, sadly. She died in her 60s, but she was sort of, the final scene is her on the Golden Gate Bridge with Roger Moore. Stunningly beautiful woman. Now this Tanya Roberts, I think she had one Jewish parent. Now, if you want to tell me a woman as stunningly beautiful and clever and cultured as that can't be integrated easier than someone straight out of Nigeria, I'd tell you you're being a bit daft. And I'd also say that the biggest threat to European civilization is probably the population explosion that is coming in Africa in the next 30 or 40 years. And so I'd say yes, you need to concentrate on on Zionist lobby where they're doing bad things, but we need to be aware where the main threat comes from. And Jewish numbers, they're never going to outbreed us. Africa is already 3 times the size of Europe, or will be by 2050. And back in 1900, Africa used to be a third of the size of Europe. Uh, so as I say, the issue is secular Ashkenazis are overrepresented. Their numbers are falling. Their children are marrying out. They don't have the moral power that they had in the 90s. And the Orthodox ones, like the Amish and the Mormons, will be on the fringes. They won't be overrepresented. And the Sephardic Jews, their IQ will be lower. And the other issue I would raise with people who go on Jew, like David Duke, who wants to mention them every 2 seconds, I would say the presence of a Jewish minority doesn't necessarily undermine a nation. I mean, yes, since 1945, because of the trauma and the persecution they suffered in the Holocaust, the majority of them have tended to be a very left-wing influence. But you go back before that, there's been Jews in Britain since Oliver Cromwell. And indeed, in Victorian Britain, we had a Jewish Prime Minister, Disraeli. I mean, Disraeli, he was baptised a Christian by his father, but he was racially Jewish. And for most of us, if you were to offer us in the movement Victorian Britain back, a 99% white Christian society, traditionalist, no feminism, no mosque, no LGBT crap, traditional values, families, schools with old-fashioned discipline, we jump at that. Well, that was under Disraeli's premiership. So the premise that if there is a Jewish minority, they will necessarily destroy a white society is just not true, because you look at Disraeli's Victorian Britain, most of us would jump if we were offered that in the movement. We offered Britain as it was under Disraeli. We'd jump at that. We'd have that in a moment. Now, there is an issue, and I'm quite prepared to acknowledge there is an issue. And we see it particularly in foreign policy. Now, Mark talks about Zionist power. I would say that the main bad influence of Zionist power does occur in the foreign policy. And I would say we can criticise that Zionist power in US foreign policy by looking at facts, so it doesn't become a mere conspiracy theory. Now, we all remember that the disgusting US NATO bombing campaign in 1999, when the Serbians had a rebellious province of Kosovo where there were Muslim terrorists going off the wall, and Serbia did a campaign to rein this Muslim terror group in, and they created a few thousand Albanian refugees, and there were maybe a couple of hundred civilian casualties. And in return for this, doing this campaign, NATO and the US, they interfered in the sovereign nation's business, and they started bombing Belgrade. They bombed every bridge across the Danube. It was absolutely disgusting. Yugoslavia was attacked. Yugoslavia had never threatened Britain or America. Yugoslavia had never done anything to Britain or America. and there was a disgusting campaign where we bombed them, which was utterly unjustified. So you can conclude from that Serbia and Yugoslavia, obviously, they didn't really have much of a powerful voice in Washington. Now, Israel, on October the 7th, they had a right to defend themselves, just as Britain defended itself against the IRA and Spain defended itself against ETA. And obviously, when they defended themselves, sadly, civilian casualties did occur. I mean, look at Bloody Sunday in 1972. But Israel is behaved like a genocidal maniac. There's been 92% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed. There's been 50,000 Palestinians murdered, 700 since the truce last week, and there's been 2 million refugees. And not only does Israel not get bombed, but they're going to the USA and they're receiving weapons and help and money and aid. And Netanyahu's going to the White House and they're walking on a red carpet. Now, from that fact, you can assume the Israel lobby in Washington is a lot more powerful than the Serbian lobby. Because if Serbia creates a few thousand refugees and kills a few hundred civilians in a war against terrorists, Muslim terrorists, and gets bombed, then how can it be that Israel can kill 50,000, 90 odd percent, 95% of whom are innocent, and nothing happens to them? And not only do they not get bombed, they get aid and money from the US, weapons, money, which is utterly disgusting. I mean, I listened. I mean, even the envoy that the US sent out there, Witkoff, is a Jewish guy. Now, I listened to his talk with Tucker Carlson, and I've got to say, he seemed a nice enough guy. He'd suffered the loss of a son, which is always a terrible tragedy for any man to go through. But again, because he's Jewish, his loyalty is always going to be towards one side. So from the contrast of the way Serbia was dealt with when they dealt with Muslim terrorists, and the way Israel has been dealt with when it's behaved like a genocidal maniac again because of a Muslim terrorist attack, I can accept the point made by people like Mark Collette and David Duke that Israel and the Zionist lobby have got too much influence, and it's a malign influence in US foreign policy. So I say we can't do a Farage and not talk about it. But I say the best thing we can do is to talk about it sensibly. If we do a David Duke and we're not just criticising their influence in foreign policy, we mention them every 2 seconds and make out like they've got magic powers, we just get laughed at, and like Nietzsche says, no one listens to us. Whereas if we approach this sensibly, what we could maybe do is have an influence and get more normies to listen to us and maybe save some of these terrible, stop some of this terrible killing in Gaza. Now, I heard that guy from Australia talk to Mark. I listened to that this morning, which was quite an interesting chat. I mean, I don't like the fact he wears a beanie. He looks like a bloody hippie. But, I mean, I'd assume he was left-wing if I saw him with that stupid beanie on. I mean, anyone who wears a hat inside, why are you wearing a hat inside? But never mind. But he said, oh, people are just criticising Israel, worried about pretending they care about the Palestinians because they don't like Israel. Now, I would say, I would hope, yes, maybe this is the case for some, but I would hope that for genuine heartfelt nationalists like myself, like Mark Collette, like a lot of other good people in the movement, that when we see those pictures on the news of dead Palestinian children, it does move us. And that Josh boy in Australia said oh, none of us would go there and fight. Well, no, I wouldn't go there and fight because it's not my war. But if there was a protest here, supposing they were making Israeli weapons here, and the weapons here that they were going to send to Israel, if there was a protest here, I would go and join that. So, and if enough of us feel that way, then the US will stop sending them weapons and money, and the Israelis will stop behaving like genocidal maniacs and killing Palestinian children. But we can only influence foreign policy in the direction the wind is blowing if we talk about this issue in a sensible, fact-based, evidence-based way, rather than being hysterical. So I'd say, yes, let's criticise, but let's the Zionist lobby and Zionist power, if you will, in foreign policy, but let's be nuanced and flexible about it and not obsessive about it. I mean, Robespierre, I've got a quote from Robespierre. He said, there are only two parties, that of corrupt men and that of virtuous men. And it's part of that inflexibility in his approach to politics is why he ended up not as the ruler of France, but with his head cut off. So nuance and flexibility in politics. Now, rather than going on about Zionists running Britain or controlling everything in some big plot, of which the evidence always seems to be rather tenuous, I would say to people in the nationalist right, the biggest open goal with regards to criticising Jewish people, and especially left-wing Jews and the Zionist lobby, is their hypocrisy and double standards when it comes to their ethno-state. And all these people who obsess on Jews, like David Duke, like Beerhall Pooch online, Boomer goes on and on about Jews, but too gutless to show his face, even though he's retired and not got a normal job to keep. Like John Palmer, who runs that My Awesome channel. They go on and on about, oh, Jews control everything in this massive, great big plot. And as I quoted Dutton earlier, a big plot is harder to keep secret than a little plot. And they've never got a leaked email, they've never got a whistleblower, there's never a recording of a Jewish billionaire telling the US president what to do. It's tenuous. It's the evidence always. And the biggest open goal is the hypocrisy of a lot of Jewish people, particularly the left-wing Jewish people. And rather than concentrating on this rabbit hole conspiracy shite, I would say point at the massive open goal of Israel's genocide. That should be the first thing you mention. And the fact that a lot of Jewish people who've been telling white people for years we mustn't collectivise and preaching civic nationalism to us are now, massively tribal racists when it comes to their ethno-state. I mean, let's take one we all love to hate, Konstantin Kisin. This is a man on that channel with that washed-up comedian who for years has been preaching to us civic nationalism. Oh yeah, we should have a patriotic movement, but white people mustn't collectivise because that becomes really nasty and really brutal. And the bastard even had the cheek to say this to some poor woman who'd been groomed and raped by Muslim gangs. And now he seamlessly turns into, when it comes to his ethno-state, a brutal ethno-racist. And a man who spent a decade preaching this Sivnat bullshit suddenly starts saying, oh, October the 7th was worse than 9/11 as there are less Jewish people in the world. So what are you saying, Konstantin Kishin? You're saying you value the life of another Jewish person more than you value the life of someone from another race. I mean, how much more racist can you be? And now he's now standing up and justifying this disgusting genocidal murder of Palestinians. Now, I'll say this clearly. Yes, Israel had a right to defend itself. But suppose my late mum had been murdered. Obviously, thankfully, this never happened. But supposing this had happened, and then someone told me, "Oh, the murderer of your mum is in that building over there, and here's a drone, and here's a button, and you can press that button, and you can kill the murderer who murdered your mum. But also, in that building, alongside that terrorist who murdered your mum, there's 200 innocent women and children." I would not press that button. And I'd say anyone moral and anyone decent would not press that button. So, you know, they're saying, "Oh, we had to blow up that building because there were 3 Hamas terrorists in there." Well, what about the 200 innocent women and children? I wouldn't even apply that policy if someone in my own family had been murdered. And so we looked at Konstantin Kissing. As I said, I will try and go in this criticism of the Jewish lobby and Zionist lobby from facts and evidence, rather than tenuous conspiracy bullshit. Now, I remember the other week, on the Rest is Politics Instagram channel, there was a Zionist who started going on about a guest that Alistair Campbell and Rory were having on, writing below in the comments that this guest was an evil anti-Semite and she shouldn't be allowed on. So I then wrote in reply to him, I said, well, the 200 innocent Palestinian kids that your ethno-state killed last week, because I think this was last week, were they anti-Semites? Did they have it coming? And I said, and also remember, last week it was Israel, not the evil Hamas terrorists who broke the truce. It was Israel who started bombing. And as I said, since they broke that truce, they've killed another 700 people. And I'd be willing to lay all my money that of those 700, maybe 100 at most, probably only about 30 or 40, were terrorists. So what does he do? He comes back to me. And I was referring to the first attack where they killed at least 300 people. And they reckoned that at least 198 had been children. And he said, "Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know which attack you're referring to," and all this and that. Now, I thought, how is that any different to Goering sitting in the dock at Nuremberg and saying, "Oh, I didn't know anything about the killing in Himmler's concentration camps." But the fact is, Goering, he was busy running an air force. He was also heavily addicted to morphine and drugs by the 1940s, and he didn't have 24-hour news channels or the internet. So it's far more believable when Goering sits in that dock at Nuremberg and says, "I didn't know about Himmler's concentration camps," than it is for this guy on Instagram who's got 24-hour news and the internet, and I assume he's not a morphine addict, to know. Because you cannot not know about what Israel's been doing. It's been on the news day after day. So again, we've quoted Konstantin Kissing with the double standards. We've quoted this guy on Instagram with the double standards. Now let's take another one of the double standards. Now, I began listening to Michael Savage, the American DJ, Dr. Michael Savage, the talk show host, years ago. And he was a Jewish person who I quite admired and liked. And he used to say about how he couldn't get a job because of affirmative action in America. And he got his doctorate and he went through years of struggling to get a job and not being able to get an academic role. And this was, I started listening to him about 2013, 2014 when I was trying to get in the prison service and I couldn't pass these bloody politically correct role plays. And and so I identified with him. And even though he was Jewish, I sort of felt at one with him and admired him and looked up to him. But the thing is, he was always a bit of a sivnat. He was always the sort of Farage, boomer sivnat. You know, he used to say, borders, language, culture, and there's an iron door between me and racism. Well, here's an old friend of mine, Edgar J. Steele's book, which he wrote, and he said, what is race? He said, race is culture gone to seed. Now, when the George Floyd incident happened, Michael Savage went into hysterics over it, which annoyed me. And he said, oh, I saw that poor man being murdered by a psychopathic racist, and he was crying for his mum. And even though I was annoyed about it, because I thought that George Floyd was a career criminal and drug addict who died of an overdose. Now, I don't like Derek Chauvin. I looked at that footage, and he's the sort of police officer. If a police officer like myself had been working with him, he'd have probably been a bully to me because I'm more easygoing. But George Floyd ended up on the ground cuffed because he was being aggressive. And Derek Chauvin would have been using the techniques that he had been taught in officer safety training. You don't go into an incident and start using your own judo moves or your own boxing moves. In an incident, you will use the techniques you have been taught to restrain someone. So, you know, Derek Chauvin would have been taught that technique of holding the neck with the knee. I assume it was to avoid being bitten. So I didn't like Derek Chauvin. I think he was probably a bully, probably a nasty piece of work, but he never set out to murder anyone. And the whole system sort of just went out after him and threw him out to dry because a scumbag criminal, drug addict, died while he was being arrested by him. Obviously, I didn't like that, but I thought, well, he's a sivnat, he's a boomer, he's set in his ways, he's got a right to a different view. But then October the 7th happened. A few weeks later, it becomes obvious that Israel is mass killing innocent women and children. And Dr. Michael Savage, the Sivnat boomer, who says there's an iron door between him and racism, suddenly, when it comes to his ethno-state, he's blatantly excusing, you know, women and children who are being killed by Israeli bombs as collateral damage. So I wrote a thing on his Instagram. I say, and anyone who questioned it, he started going on about the Holocaust and all the rest of it. And I wrote a thing on his Instagram and said, going on about the Holocaust doesn't excuse killing innocent children in 2023. And those children, their skin was just as brown as George Floyd's skin. So I said, why are you going into hysterics over St. George Floyd? You know, oh, he was murdered, oh, I was so moved by it. And yet there's an innocent Palestinian child of 3 or 4 blown to smithereens who's never committed a crime, who's never taken drugs, and you're unmoved by it because it's your ethno-state. So this iron door between you and racism, this iron door seems to swing open pretty quickly when it comes to your ethno-state. So I said, you know, if George Floyd deserves this liberal hysteria because he had brown skin, why doesn't the Palestinian child deserve this liberal hysteria? And what did he do? He just told me I was a bigot and blocked me. And the fact is, I'm not excusing the killing of any child anywhere. Dr. Michael Savage is the one who thinks it's okay for women and children to be killed as collateral damage because he's got a racist fanaticism on behalf of his ethno-state. And as I've said to you previously, Spain fought ETA, Britain fought the IRA, and neither waded knee deep in the blood of innocent women and children. Now, not only did he block me and anyone else who criticised his treated ethno-state, he then stopped having one of his best guests on, Colonel McGregor, because he criticised the ethno-state. And Colonel McGregor, I remember him saying, this will not stop when Israel thinks they've killed enough Arabs. And he got annoyed. And so there you go. Not only is he blocking any listener who disagrees, any guest who criticises his ethno-state, he won't have them on again. And worse is to come, he had Jeff Rovin, a Jewish novelist, on his show, and then Jeff Rovin started saying that a lot of these pictures that we're seeing on the news of dead women and children, they're fake. Because apparently Jeff Rovin was watching, and when there was a row of dead children, one of the bodies moved. Well, Jeff Rovin, you high IQ Jew, have you not heard of rigor mortis? And Savage just sat there and nodded, didn't object to this at all. Now I thought, how is that any different to David Irving saying that no Jewish women and children died at Auschwitz? Now, you know, they've got laws saying that someone like David Irving has to go to prison in Germany because he's denied the numbers of women and children who were being killed by the Nazis, and yet the Jews now are doing the same thing. They're saying, oh, all these Palestinian women and children we've seen on the news, oh, it's all fake. You know, so who's going to prosecute Jeff Rovin and send Jeff Rovin to prison for denying a genocide? Now, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So obviously, I'm not saying every single Jewish person is like this. There have been small numbers of Jewish people who have been on marches against this disgusting genocide. But I think the only famous one I've heard in terms of on podcast is Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who spoke to Tucker Carlson. That's the only famous Jew who I've heard who's had the guts to stand up and say, no, it's wrong to kill innocent women and children. Now the thing is, how they behaved wouldn't be such an issue if Jewish people had not spent the last 80 years lecturing white people on how to behave. They've spent 80 years telling us we mustn't be racist, we mustn't collectivise, and now their ethno-state kills innocent women and children of another race by the thousand. Now George Galloway, obviously he's left-wing scum, so he went out to South Africa in the 80s to campaign against apartheid. Now, apartheid South Africa, it wasn't perfect, but it was a first world nation, unlike the third world crime-ridden dump that is the South Africa of today. Now, George Galloway said when he was out in South Africa campaigning against apartheid, virtually every house I stayed in was Jewish. So, you know, you've had loads of Jewish people in the 1980s and 1990s protesting against white South Africa, the white ethno-state, if you will, and yet when it comes to their ethno-state, we're not allowed to say a word as they wade knee-deep in the blood of women and children. So I would say to all of you, a far more powerful point to make to left-wing Jews and Zionists, rather than going on this Duke-esque shite, oh, you control everything, you run the world, say to them, what would you rather be? Would you rather be a black person in South Africa in 1984 or a Palestinian in Gaza in 2024? Now, I know which of those two I would rather be. So I would say this is the point at which you can really criticise the Zionist lobby. They spent 80 years lecturing to white people about don't collectivise, don't be racist, and yet their ethno-state is 100 times more brutal. And I would rather be a black person in South Africa in 1984 than a Palestinian in Gaza in 2024. But this double standard has become so obvious that again it's undermined a lot of the power that they once had. I mean, I said about the 90s being the peak of their power, the Schindler's List 90s. Now, I remember a few weeks ago the the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz on the news, on the mainstream media. It was just a 2-minute thing. Now, years ago, the news would have meandered in that. It would have been a 10-minute top of the headlines item. You know, the Jewish person at Auschwitz lecturing the rest of the world on how we need to avoid racism. But it was a little tiny thing. Last item on the news, 2 minutes. And I would say that's because they've lost that moral power. Through this brutal genocide in Gaza, that moral power they had to lecture the rest of the world is gone forever. Because you've got someone who wasn't even alive in the 1940s standing up lecturing the world about, oh, let's not be racist, let's not have discrimination, and lecturing the rest of the world on how we should behave. And they're like, well, your ethno-state killed 20,000 brown Palestinian children last month. So I think really with what has happened in Israel, they've lost a lot of that moral power which they once had to lecture and preach to the rest of the world. And again, I don't say this about every single Jew. It's, Isaac Asimov, one of my favourite novelists when I was a young teenager, was Jewish, and he was a really nice guy, a really decent guy. And my friend Adrian at Orpington College, I knew his dad who owned a clothes shop, and again, really nice guy. So again, when I criticise their lobby, particularly the left-wing lobby, I'm not having to go at every single one of them. But, I mean, this is the thing. I say we should criticise them. There's a lot to criticise here. As Greg Johnson said, we can't ignore this issue, but I would say we must base it on fact and logic and not on spurious, tenuous conspiracy crap. Because if we do base it on the spurious, tenuous conspiracy crap, we lose a lot of, particularly boomers. We're not going to get those civnats over to our side. I mean, I always remember my friend who ran the Conservative Democratic Alliance, Mike Smith. He'd never joined the BNP, and the reason he'd never joined is because he very much was in. He didn't like multiculturalism. He didn't like the LGBT nonsense. He didn't like feminism. He agreed with us on 90%, but the reason he avoided the BNP was because he didn't like this Nazi stuff. So if you go down this conspiracy sort of rabbit hole, particularly boomers, you're going to scare them off. I mean, I remember when I got into trouble in the police, when I was placed on restricted duty, sat in a briefing for the late shift, 2 p.m, Belgravia police station. And this sergeant, Amy Washington, comes and gets me out of the briefing. Oh, the inspector wants to see you, Inspector Pender. And a slime ball who, the minute I was in trouble, made up more lies against me. That's loyalty to your men who serve under you, isn't it? But there you go. So I walked out and I walked down. As I walked down the corridor, and she didn't walk with me, she walked in front of me. I thought, something has happened. I've been found out, and that was it. And when I got to Bromley Station, I was going home, and I told Alan I've been put on restricted duty because of something I wrote on Facebook. He was in the car and he got really angry. He said, It's your fault. It's all these stupid shows you listen to online. So it's not normal. And this is the fact. This is how the boomers are. They grew up in this world of 4 TV channels. And my uncle, he still just listens to the radio. And I say to him, Alan, you can listen to numerous things. Get your mobile, download the Podbeam app, and you can listen to history programs, political programs, all your favourite radio. But he's not interested. He didn't want to know. I said, you can look up this and look up. But again, he don't want to know. And this is how the boomers are. That's the world they grew up in. So, as I say, there is an issue here that that we can criticise. But I'd say to us, we need to handle this criticism correctly and not do it in a way that flies into conspiracy theory. Anything we say in terms of criticising the Zionist lobby or the Jewish lobby, let's base it on cold hard fact. Let's not exaggerate facts or make statements in the absence of facts because we don't like them. And part of the thing that you get from people who are big into this question is you get this from people who believe in conspiracy theories. They get this mentality that they know it all, and that people who don't agree with them, they're just not as clever. Now, part of the reason, working class right winger like me would despise middle class libtards so much is someone like me, they would say, oh, you don't agree with me because you're not as clever as me. You're just too thick to see the benefits of this glorious multicultural society that we've got. And saying about Inspector Pender, who used to run my team E in Westminster, I remember one Saturday there was a protest by the English Defence League, and he sits there in the briefing and he says, I wonder what the IQs would be of all the men on that march. See, there's his little thing. Oh, look at me. I'm a clever police inspector. I'm so much more intellectually superior than all those ignorant troglodytes on that march. So there has been this thing of middle class liberals that they love to say they're cleverer, and there have been surveys that back this out. I have to be honest and be self-critical. As I said to you earlier, there was that survey that said the BNP voters had in 2010 tended to have a lower IQ. And part of this, as Dr. Dutton says, is that people with just above average IQ will take the prevalent views in society and convince themselves of its veracity. So they'll take, if they were in Elizabethan England, they convince themselves that Protestantism was the correct form of Christianity. If they were in Queen Mary's England, they take the view that Catholicism was the correct view. This is how they are. In Stalin's Russia, they'd be a Stalinist. In Hitler's Germany, they'd be a Nazi. I mean, I remember there was this once I got fired, there was this Indian who Mintu Mia, who sort of walks around Charing Cross Police Station in a suit, preening himself. You'd never see him in uniform, never wanted to go out on the street. And he'd always say about being thick. And I get the same thing from these avatar boys. Well, I always say, I don't need to be superior to anyone. I'm quite happy to accept there's plenty of people far cleverer than me, whatever. But I would say, you want to call me thick? Where's your A levels? I've got my ABB A levels here. They're my certificate. I say, fine, you can call me thick, but you need to have ABB or above at A level. So, and this is the same thing I will get from the middle class liberals like Mintu Mia and Inspector Pender saying that all right wingers are thick. Then from the Jew obsessive avatars online like Beerhall Pooch and John Palmer, my awesome channel, they'll then turn to someone like me who's not obsessed with Jews and say, "Oh, you just don't know as much as me. I know the truth. You're just, I mean, they talk to you like you're thick. Well, I say, and first thing I would say, right, you want to call me thick? That's fine. Where's your A-level certificates? What you get in your A-levels?" And then they go quiet. I mean, that John Palmer, my awesome channel, he actually said, "Oh, Hitler didn't kill anyone." I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, yes, you can debate the numbers killed in the Holocaust or by Mao or by Stalin, but the idea that Hitler didn't kill anyone, well, go ask Ernest Rowan. It's absolutely absurd. But I would just say to these guys, hiding behind an avatar, saying everyone with a different view is rather childish, and you won't convince anyone. Now, you come to me and say, "Look, Gus, you're wrong. There is a Jewish influence here because of this, this, and this." Fine, I'll accept it. But what these guys do, a lot of these JQ obsessives, they do the same that middle class libtards do. Middle class libtards, they're never going to convince me of political correctness by coming to me and saying, "Oh, you can't see the benefits of multiculturalism because you're thick." And John Palmer, my awesome channel, and Beer Hall Pooch, they're never going to convince me, "Oh, you can't see the Jewish conspiracy because you're thick." Now, as I've said, I can look at things like the Jewish influence on American foreign policy and their lobby, and I can see there is an issue. But I would also say they don't run everything. And if there were no white liberal traitors, they probably couldn't do anything. I mean, I know one of the things that Mossad does is have rich people who work for it. I mean, this is a great book, The Assassination of Robert Maxwell. And it said that he worked for Mossad, and then when he got in financial trouble, he tried to get them to help him out with threats, and that they eventually murdered him round near here in Tenerife, which may be true, may not be true. But again, it seems, I mean, what Israel did with Hezbollah, with all the bombs in the speakers, that again shows a great deal of skill in their foreign service and ability to do things abroad and connections. So you can look at things like that and say, you look, they can do this because that's what they did there. Fine. I mean, probably I'm well placed to see that when people do talk down, I mean, I've had it a lot. I don't know why, but there you go. I remember there was this guy when I was in Royal Mail, Kevin Cam. And as I've said in the past, when I was in Royal Mail, on the side, I'd do a little bit of window cleaning or whatever for people. And once Kevin got me to look after his dogs, and I did that. And my uncle said, and the thing is with him, he was always trying to be the big man and trying to cut me down in price. Now, I was always reasonable. I was friends with a lot of my customers. If I thought a customer was in financial trouble, I'd happily say, "Look, I'll come and do your windows every 3 months rather than every 2 or every 1. I'd try and help people out." But he had the money, but he was always trying to barter me down. And he was always trying to talk to me like I was thick. And I said to him, I said, "Look, Kevin, I have got A-levels. I've done studying," but he wouldn't believe me. I mean, I didn't care whether he believed me or not, but the thing is, he seemed to think he was some sort of big success. But my friend Danny Cole, who after I left Royal Mail, I got him to do my mum's garden because he did gardening. And he said all Kevin and Cam did, he joined Royal Mail in the 1980s when it was a good, secure job for life. And he managed to get into a secure, good management position years ago. And what he did years ago, you couldn't do it now. It's the same thing sometimes I get from my uncle who says, "Oh, I've made a success of my life." Well, he joined General Accident, Uncle Alan, at age 16 with no qualifications, and because property prices went up, he made a lot of money. So he's now on a tiny little house on the estate in Highgate, but because of where it is, it's worth a lot of money. And when he left Royal Mail, he was a manager. I said, yeah, he worked at the same firm for 30 years. I said to him, Alan, if you were a kid today with no GCSEs who left school at 16, you'd leave school and you go from 1 0-hour contract to another. And this is part of the thing. These boomers, they seem to think sometimes there's some sort of big success when they've really just been lucky and fortunate. And we should, and when we've been in that, when we're in that position, we should acknowledge that. I mean, I'll give you some other examples of people. I mean, as you know, after I left, my jobs, I was a school teacher, a postman, a prison officer, and a policeman. Now, when I joined the police, because I hadn't done uh, work on computers for years as a prison officer and postman, it was quite hard to get used to the typing up and doing all the debts. And I wasn't used to the radio. You occasionally had a radio in the prison, but not always. So it was quite hard for me to get used to those things. So I did my original coach patrol, and then my mentor, Mike Westlake, he recommended me for a further 4 weeks coach patrol. And I've said to you before, the Met is very much a jungle. And because it's this sort of big chest pumping world, when you're the weak wildebeest at the back of the herd, people will come for you. I don't know why they do it. I think maybe it proves themselves as some sort of big man. But I mean, I'd always say, any young person watching this, never look for trouble. Always just try and be friendly and polite. Enough trouble will come to you. You know, you know, you'll get enough trouble coming to you, enough conflict and bullies and trouble coming to you, who you will have to stand and deal with. So never look for trouble. Trouble will come to you. Don't be going out looking for more. So I was put on this extended coach patrol. I remember the first week I was saying to someone about, oh, I need to get a process book done. Now, in coach patrol, you had to do various things. You had to do a stop and search where you filled in the form. And one of the other things you had to do was a process book. And this is when someone is driving and they're on their mobile phone, you stop them and you do a process book on them. And they can then contest it or just accept the fine. So I was like, I've got to do this process book. And suddenly there's this little shit Sam. And he goes to me, process books, they're a comfort blanket for you. All you want to do is process books because they're a comfort blanket, because you can't do anything. And I held my tongue. I was a little bit pissed off by this. But the thing is, this wasn't some 20-year veteran who had the right to say this. This was a bloody annoying little shit who joined about a month after me. But he sees someone who's failed his coach patrol, someone who joined a month after him, and he thinks, oh, I can be the big man now. I can put someone down who joined a month after me. And another time, I was in the yard at Belgravia Police Station. I'll reenact it. I get my police hat out, so I'm standing there in the yard, Belgravia Police Station, minding my own business, not hurting anyone, just waiting. I think I was waiting for someone. And suddenly, I see this ugly old blonde woman, middle-aged blonde woman with dyed hair, hideously ugly. And she's not even the head of my team. She had no business talking to me. Sergeant Siobhan Elliott comes up to me. I don't think you've got it in you, Gus. Got what in me? I don't think you've got it in you. Well, what, Sergeant Elliott? Oh, the potential to be a police officer. I was like, we've never even conversed before, Sergeant. How do you know what potential I've got or what potential I haven't got? And then I told various other people, oh, that Sergeant Elliott, head of Team B, she came up to me trying to get me to resign. Oh, this job's not for everyone. And then she said, oh, you can't invite, you talk to him, he goes and tells other people. Well, the fact is, what really annoyed me about that, Sergeant Siobhan Elliott, she's now at Brixton. She went to custody. If you ever get arrested in Brixton and you see an ugly blonde woman, middle-aged blonde woman behind the custody suite desk, that will be Sergeant Siobhan Elliott. Because Charing Cross custody refused to have her. But the thing is that really annoys me about that, it's not fine. She's got a right to say, oh, I'm useless, I can't be a policeman. But it's the fact that she wouldn't dare say that to any of the little 5-foot feminazi women or any of the camp gay people like Anton in his driving around his little rainbow car, like Stuart Hawke talking about being gay every 5 seconds. She wouldn't dare say that to them. But she sees the white heterosexual working class man. Oh, I can have a go at him. I can put him down. And another time, this was after I'd passed my coach patrol. So I'd got through it. I've got better at the radio and the computer, and I viewed myself as a competent police officer. And this, when I felt I really became a sort of competent police officer, was on the impact team. And then when I was on the impact team in Leicester Square, which was based at Charing Cross Police Station, and I was there from February till about July 2017. I remember I was sitting there one day in the impact room, and this new kid comes in, and I think he'd been sent to impact after his coach patrol. And it was this kid with blonde hair called Josh from Team A, and he'd been sent to do 5 months on impact. And first thing he ever said to me, "You're not a proper police officer." Now I don't know why he said that. I assume either he'd heard that I'd had to take an extended coach patrol, or he thought because I'm not a hard man, maybe I've got a wussy high-pitched voice that I'm not hard enough to be. But I mean, I thought, well, normally when I meet someone new, I say, "Hello, how are you?" I don't sort of go up to them and say, "You're useless at your job." But this is how the police is. So because I've been in this sort of chest pumping, macho bullshit world, I can sort of see straight away when people are talking down to others. And I can see even people when they don't mean to do it. I can see when they do it. Now, and I mean, part of the thing is, this is one of the reasons why I say you should go out there and do normie jobs and have some experience before you go into politics, because it toughens you up in a way. I mean, all the nasty experiences I've been through, like evil Margaret Bamford throwing me out of teaching, like Paul Blur and Sahar Musa grassing me in the police service, it was all traumatic, but in a way it makes you sort of tougher. And the tougher you are, you don't tend to worry about the silly little things. Now, we could all be asked, what's the worst thing you've ever been through? Now, obviously, apart from relatives and loved ones dying, personally, in terms of pain, it would be, I woke up here in May 2021, and this was bloody lockdown. I'd lost muscle, and I was trying to put it back in the gym, and I probably overdid it. And I had a broken shoulder, but the thing is, I didn't know I had a broken shoulder until I woke up on, I think it was the 18th of May 2021, and my shoulder was out. And it's quite scary because your shoulder's hanging out, dislocated. And so I had to go to the hospital, and then they jam it back in. It bloody hurts. And then I had an operation that I didn't need, where they put bloody metal in it. So I still I haven't got the movement I should have here. But obviously that was quite a traumatic experience, you know, having a dislocated shoulder, waking up with a dislocated shoulder. Now I heard Katie Hopkins talk on an interview with, I think it might have been Dr. Dutton, I know he has talked to her. And she said because she had epilepsy, that often used to happen to her in the night. She'd have an epileptic fit while she was asleep, and she'd wake up and her shoulder would be dislocated. And obviously it's painful when it's dislocated. It's even more painful when they're putting it back in. And that had happened to her something like 30 odd times. So I think I went through that once and it was bloody horrible. Now Katie Hopkins, she went through that 30 times. So then people think, oh, why is she so tough and doesn't care when she gets slagged off? Well, that's why. If you've had epileptic fits in the night and woken up with your shoulder out 30 times, having someone calling you a bitch or sacking you from LBC, it doesn't sort of cut it. So in a way, going through bad experiences, like Katie Hopkins has done there, can make you a better political operator. Now back from that, I've got distracted by dislocated shoulders. Now, I've said because of people who talk down to you, I can see when it's being done because I've experienced it in the police and that. And I can see sometimes people will talk down to others even without meaning to do so. And what we've got to always be aware of in selling our ideas is how we come across. Now, I remember I heard Mark, and this isn't a personal criticism of Mark. I like Mark. He's a nice guy. He does a lot for people. He always answers emails. He always shows kindness to people. He tries to help people out. He puts a lot into the movement. But this is just a bit of advice on optics, because he was saying about some pal of his who'd been a Civnat, and he was saying, oh, I had this Civnat pal, I don't know whether it was Britain First or EDL, and he said he didn't understand the Jewish question. Now, to make a comparison, I had a good friend of mine here, Sarah Bell, in a cafe, who was a waitress in a cafe, and sadly her and her mum have sold it now, so I don't see them so often, but I still see occasionally at the gym. Now, Sarah Bell and her boyfriend was a mechanic, gorgeous young Spanish girl. She was very into tattoos, and I don't like these bloody tattoos that all these young people are having. Now, I remember I once said to her as a joke, because her and her boyfriend is stuck in rented accommodation, and I remember I once said to her, oh, less of those tattoos, you might be able to actually buy a flat and get a mortgage. And she didn't take offence because she's a good friend of mine. But I thought I shouldn't have said that, because we have to take account of how things look, how things come across. Now someone like myself, I own a house because sadly my parents have died and I had an inheritance. So I inherited 350,000 and I had 50,000 and my uncle gave me the rest, and I was able to buy a house because of that. So for me, someone who's got a house due to inheritance, who owns property due to inheritance, I shouldn't really be saying to some youngster today, oh, don't have less tattoos and you might own property like me, because that looks a little bit arrogant. And she knew I wasn't being arrogant, but unintentionally so. Now, the same way, if Mark says to some working class EDL or Britain First guy, oh, you don't understand the Jewish question, how does that look? When Mark's had a brilliant education and gone to a private school, for him then to turn around and say to some working class Britain First kid who went to some shitty comprehensive, oh, you don't understand the JQ. It doesn't look good. It's like me saying to people, have less tattoos and you'll have a house. So in a way, we have to be aware of how things come across. So I'd say even when even people like Mark who don't intentionally talk down to people, when we get onto this JQ thing and conspiracies, there is that tendency to do this. And I mean, Mark and myself, we're privileged in another way because I went to Exeter University in 1997. I think Mark's 2 years younger than me. So he went to university 2 years later. Well, I was the last year with no tuition fees. And Mark, he would have had tuition fees, but they would have been very, very small. Well, now, a young person today, if they want to go to university, they're looking at 30 grand of debt. So Mark and me, we had free, virtually, university education. And for us then to turn around to youngsters today and say, oh, you don't understand something, well, they're like, well, how are we supposed to understand? You know, they're going to obviously get their back up because we had a free university education and they never will. I mean, I wouldn't go to university now. Someone said to me now, if I was 18, 19 now, unless I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, I would not go there. I wouldn't want to start my working life with 30,000 of debt. So I just say to Mark or any other leader, when you're talking about this issue, if you want to make points that are of a conspiracy flavour, back them up with evidence and please don't talk down to people. Either intentionally, like idiots like Beerhall Pooch do, or unintentionally, like nice guys like Mark Collette and myself also sometimes do. And the thing is, when it comes to how we talk to people, elites are how aware of how damaging this is. When those who've got an education or say middle class talk down up to working class people. I mean, I don't know if you remember Emily Thornberry when she was in Rochester, and she took a photo of that council house with a white van outside and with 2 England flags hanging from the windows. And she said, image of Rochester. Well, she got in trouble for that because that was like the Labour Party now. It's gone from being sort of based on the industrial working class to being a sort of composed of sort of middle class social workers and teachers. And Emily Thornberry got in trouble for that tweet about Rochester because the liberal elites know how damaging it is if you're trying to win people over and you talk down to them. And I mean, let's be honest, chances are Emily Thornberry, if she was university educated, she probably did have a higher IQ than the bloke in that council house with the England flags. But again, she's never going to win him over by pointing that out. She's got to go to him and approach him and win him over on arguments, on things, look, this is what's good for you. I mean, I'm quite happy to accept Emily Thornberry's got a higher IQ than me, but again, I mean, maybe the outlier, and that the guy in the Rochester Council House might be a physics professor, but you never know. And I'd say another thing about this JQ conspiracy, it does tend to make people paranoid. And I mean, I remember when I was in the BNP, I joined, and everyone knew I'd come from the Tory party, and there was this bloke. He was a funny bloke. He was quite highly strung. He was a gardener from Orpington, Tubman Lane, Orpington. He used to drive about in a little red van, and he was quite up and down, and he was always going on about the Jews and conspiracy theories. So he was big into that. And then he got a thing in his head about me, that I was a Tory spy, that I'd been sent by the Tories to spy on the BNP. And because I'd been away at the college studying to be a teacher, I wasn't on the electoral register. So he says to me one night in the pub, he says, I looked you up on the electoral register and you weren't there. And then that's when, from champion Richard Barnbrook here, I've got one of the classic late night calls from Richard Barnbrook when he was half cocked. And he started asking me all these questions. Are you are who you say you are? And I just said to him, I said, look, Richard, if you're going to not trust me and think I'm a spy, I'll just go back to the Tory party or UKIP. I said, I'll give you your leaflets back. How's that? And then all of a sudden he backed down. Okay, I didn't call you a liar. So, but the thing is, I'd say the reason this little gardener guy in his red van, Tony or whatever his name was, the reason he became so paranoid was because he was into all these conspiracy theories. And they tend to do that. They tend to do that to people. And I mean, I was flattered in a way that he thought I was so important in the Tory party that the Tories would have selected me as an ace James Bond type spy to spy on the local BNP branch. And the thing is, I'm not sending out an ex-comrade because this same guy in 2008 he left the BNP because, as well as being into conspiracy theories, he got involved with these happy clappy born again Christian groups, and they convinced him that the BNP and everyone in it was evil. So then my mate Steve the decorator, he dumped a load of leaflets on him. He's like, I can't have these leaflets anymore, they're evil. So there you go. He went from one thing to the other, but I would argue it was believing in all these conspiracy theories. That's why I actually was able to get so many votes in 2008, I would say, because my mate Steve, the decorator, he had a ton of these leaflets put on his hands because this guy Tony had got in with the born again Christians and left. So me and my mate Steve the decorator had a ton of these leaflets, and this is why I was able to get, I reckon, such a high vote in Biggin Hill, because we had so many to get rid of. So I'd say that's another thing about it. Over obsessing on the JQ can make people A, arrogant, and B, a little paranoid, like Alex Jones gets. I mean, he's a good orator. You watch it, but you watch his show, he is at times a little paranoid. Now, I'd also say, we can irritate people with this. I mean, what's the one creator who gets on everyone's nerves? He gets on a show once and then they never have him on again. E. Michael Jones. And why is it that E. Michael Jones gets on everyone's nerves? Because he will never consider opposing arguments. He has his view, his mantra, and then if someone disagrees with him, he won't even consider the opposing argument. He just shouts louder. And the only person who'll have him on now is unwashed, who's fallen out with everyone, and who's got no other guests. Now, what did Bismarck say? I've got a nice little quote from Bismarck. Bismarck said, "Politics is the art of the possible." And I'd say all you hardcore guys, I mean that lot down in Australia, all the rest of you who think you can recreate Nazi Germany, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's like trying to bring back the Witchfinder General or the Divine Right of Kings. You're wasting your time and you're undermining the movement achieving something more possible, more reasonable. Now, what do we want? What do most nationalists want? I would like a 95% white Britain, a traditional Britain that was based around the family and traditional values, a Europe that was the same. I'd like gays to be discreet. I'd say the only place for that damn rainbow flag is in the window of a gay bar. I'd like no gay adoptions, no feminism, an acceptance that men and women are suited for different jobs. An acceptance also that motherhood is just as worthy for a woman as having children. No moss, no halal. And at times, all these things have seemed so possible. I mean, I remember when I was a student in Lewes in 2002, and I walked down the high street one morning and then into the newsagent, and I saw I still remember seeing the Daily Telegraph on the shelf in the newsagent. It said, "Le Pen breaks through," and my heart soared. And there's been times like that where we've all felt that victory is near and that what we want is possible. And I just say, if by overdoing the JQ you make this less obtainable, you're not really helping the movement. Uh, because this is one of those things that that it's used as a stick to beat us with. I mean, if you, I mean, you remember Nick's notorious uh, appearance on Question Time? The very first question they came out with was about Auschwitz. Now, what the hell has Auschwitz got to do with any British person or with the BNP? No member of the BNP was ever at Auschwitz. No ancestor of a member of the BNP was ever at Auschwitz. And it was used as a stick to beat us. And rather than just saying, look, it was one of many genocides in history, you know, Nick, he starts going on about radio messages in Eastern Europe and allowing the lefties on the panel, look at this evil Nazi. And you look more recently at the riots where Starmer was criticising the rioters after the Southport riots, and the very first thing he mentions was this writer with a Nazi tattoo. So it's used again and again to stop us achieving more realistic aims. I mean, worst of all was John Tyndall. You think 1979? I mean, the BNP was the biggest ever success in terms of electoral success for a nationalist party, because with seats in the European Parliament. But the national, but the BNP was about 14,000 members. I think the National Front had about 16,000. And 1979, it seemed like the National Front was on the verge of a breakthrough. And the reason they never got there was because of all this Nazi shit. And it was used to scare the 1979 voter off. And part of this is we have to meet people where they are. And I mean, I'd, you know, Dutton always says you have to make, to get a momentum going, you have to achieve around 20%. And it's not like we have to win over 90% of people. We only have to get 20%, and then you get the momentum going. It's been proved in scientific experiments where more people will come to you. And if by obsessing on this one issue, which is one of many issues, you scare people off and ensure we only remain at 5 or 6%, you're undermining the movement. Now, as I say, you've got to meet people where they are. I mean, little anecdote here. When I was at Orpington College, we went on a college trip to Moscow in the winter. It was absolutely freezing, and we had, I think, 3 nights in St. Petersburg and then 3 nights in Moscow. And then we caught the night train from St. Petersburg down to Moscow. Now this train, it was in the middle of winter, but this train was bloody boiling. And I remember some of us college kids from Orpington, I think a few of them opened the windows because this train was so overheated. But then the Russians on the train they really got annoyed. These fucking English kids are opening the windows because you think those Russians, they've lived their whole lives in a winters of freezing cold, and when they get heat, they want to be in that heat. And then they get someone from bloody England turn up, oh, this train's too hot, I'll open the window a little bit. And it really annoys them because their whole upbringing is about, their whole way of life would be about preserving the heat so you don't freeze. See, that's an example. You've got to meet people where they are. If you come at people with something that makes them feel uncomfortable, or that is foreign to them, or what their habits are, they're accustomed to, they'll tend to be repulsed and be aggressive towards you. And see, Greg Johnson said, you know, how we win is by people stealing our ideas. And if our ideas don't appeal to people, we can't ever win. And I always say to people, whatever it is, however we're going to win, whether it's civil war or elections, the side that will win is the side that can get the most people over to it. And it is an issue, the JQ, that we must mention. And they have a negative impact on foreign policy. And their evil ethno-state is killing brown children every day. I mean, in the time I've made this video, how many innocent Palestinian children have been blown up, killed, died in hospital? And what they're doing gives us plenty of grounds to criticise them on the facts, on the evidence, on the events. But if we go over and we exceed the facts and the evidence, so desperate are we to criticise them, we undermine our own cause. And also, if we sit there and say anyone who's got a slightly different opinion than us is stupid, again, we won't win anyone over. So I say to people, yes, let's mention this. We can't do a Farage and ignore this, particularly when Israel is behaving like a genocidal maniac. But at the other extreme, we can't overdo this. And so I'd like to say to all of you in the movement, let's try and approach this in a sensible, evidence-based, facts-based way. And all I do is I put my ideas out there. I'm not saying I'm 100% correct. Someone may come up with an idea or an approach that is better than mine, but I'll put my ideas out there, and hopefully other people can all do the same, and we can find a way of dealing with and approaching this issue that doesn't scare people off, that isn't, normally terrifying. And that's all I'd ask you all to do. And like you say, let's have a sensible approach on this. And the minute we go away from evidence and fact on this JQ or on this Zionist issue, we're just as bad as the sort of woke hysterics. The core strength in our movement is that we stick to the truth and we stick to the facts. I mean, there's a thing, a review on this thing about Edgar J. Steele's book, and he said, the reviewer said about that book, he said, Steele writes about the differences we all see and pretend not to notice. Now we've got to say about what we see, and then people will think, yeah, I saw that too, and I pretended I didn't see it, but it was there. But if we exaggerate, we lose that skill and we lose that strength. So thank you for your time. Bye bye.